Windsor. Arguably the world's most famous royal family, their every move and action followed by millions across social media. Once the Saxe-Coburg and Gothas, but then 1917 happened and Britain decided German names were out, so they rebranded. During their reign, the British Empire, one of the largest in history, the empire where the sun never set, with Queen Elizabeth steering the monarchy through a century of change, achieving the record of the longest reigning British monarch and the second longest reigning monarch in the world after the Sun King. They cost the British taxpayer $132 million a year, and through the Crown Estate, technically control 15% of all land in the UK. Whatever you do, don't ask them about Prince Andrew. Habsburg. For centuries, they shaped the political landscape of the continent through a combination of dynastic marriages, strategic alliances, and military influence. They're known for what's called the Habsburg jaw, an elongated lower jaw and prominent chin, most notably displayed in King Charles II of Spain, who had it so bad he even had trouble eating. This is what happens when your family tree is less a tree and more of a closed loop, like the shape of this Habsburg country ball. The Habsburgs didn't just run countries, they collected them like Pokemon cards. Remember Isabel and Ferdinand of Spain, the royals of Castile and Aragon who bankrolled Columbus? Well, the Habsburgs stole their empire out from under them, in a perfect storm of dynastic marriage and untimely deaths. Charles V ruled what was considered the zenith of the dynasty, controlling possessions across modern-day Spain, Italy, Germany, the Low Countries, and colonies across the New World. His abdication led to a split in the empire, partitioning it between his brother Ferdinand I with the Austrian side, and his son Philip II with the Spanish side. By the 18th century, a succession crisis and lack of surviving heirs led the Spanish Habsburgs to go extinct. The throne was taken over by the French Bourbons. The Austrian Habsburgs, on the other hand, would continue to limp along for the next few centuries, gradually losing territories and influence across Italy, Germany, and the Low Countries, when World War I finally did what centuries of bad marriages couldn't, end the dynasty. Hohenzollern. Germany's unification art. The dynasty began in Swabia, one of 5 stem duchies in Germany during the 11th century. The Hohenzollerns were loyal vassals of the Swabian Hohenstaufen dynasty, with their name coming from the Zollern castle in Swabia. The family famously split into 2 branches, the Catholic Swabian branch and the Protestant Franconian branch. The Franconian side secured the Burgraviate of Nuremberg, and in 1411 they were granted the electorate of Brandenburg by Emperor Sigismund, eventually selling their rights to Nuremberg in 1427 to concentrate on Brandenburg. Basically 15th century house flipping. In 1525, Albert of Prussia, Hohenzollern and Grand Master of the Teutonic Order, secularized order, created the Duchy of Prussia the Hohenzollerns are so often associated with the famed Brandenburg Prussia being united in 1618 through personal union. In 1701, the house was granted the title King in Prussia by the Habsburg Emperor Leopold I in exchange for support in the War of Spanish Succession. The title evolved to King of Prussia after the first partition of Poland in 1772 by the renowned Frederick the Great. Over the next century, Prussia would gobble up territories in Saxony, the Rhineland, Westphalia, and the principalities of their Swabian cousins, collecting German states like Infinity Stones. After defeating Austria in 1866 and France in 1870, Prussia was able to unite Germany under the German Empire in 1871. The Hohenzollerns would continue to rule as German emperors until 1918, when they joined the Habsburgs in the European royal family's least exclusive club, the unemployed. Bourbon. The House of Bourbon began as a cadet branch of the Capetian dynasty in the late Middle Ages, and actually inspired the naming of the same liquor. Descended from Robert, son of Louis IX, the Bourbons held minor French titles for centuries before ascending to the throne. The breakthrough came in 1589, with the death of the last Valois king. The Protestant Henry of Navarre converted to Catholicism and became Henry IV of France. His grandson was the famed Louis XIV, the Sun King, who expanded France's borders through military conquest and was also known for state centralization, famously saying, "L'État c'est moi," or "I am the state." He also revoked the Edict of Nantes signed by his grandfather, which gave French Calvinists religious freedom, and built the Palace of Versailles. To secure their dynastic ambitions, the Bourbons repeatedly intermarried with the Habsburgs, their greatest rivals. Most famously, Louis XIV married Maria Theresa of Spain, and nearly a century later, Marie Antoinette, daughter of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, married Louis XVI of France. But despite these unions, the Bourbons and Habsburgs remained in near constant conflict. After the War of Spanish Succession, Philip V, grandson of Louis XIV, ascended to the Spanish throne, founding the Spanish Bourbon dynasty, extending the house beyond France. Over the centuries, the Bourbons would go on to rule Naples, Sicily, Parma, and Spain. Ultimately, it was only in Spain that the dynasty survived through to the modern era, though even there it was interrupted by republics, dictatorships, and civil wars. The Spanish Bourbons were ultimately restored in 1975 following the death of the Spanish dictator Franco, and they continue to reign today under King Philippe VI. Savoy. Started from the Alps, ended in Rome. The Italians' unification arc. The House of Savoy began as a regional dynasty in the 11th century, ruling over an area in southeastern France and northwestern Italy. It often found itself trapped between regional powers, forced to play the Bourbons and Habsburgs against each other to preserve their own sovereignty. The turning point came under Victor Amadeus II. Initially allied with France during the War of Spanish Succession, he switched sides to support the Habsburgs. As a reward for his realignment, the 1713 Treaty of Utrecht granted him the Kingdom of Sicily, making him the first Savoyard king. From the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the House of Savoy began the long journey of Italian unification, beginning with the absorption of the Republic of Genoa in 1815. Under the Italian Risorgimento, Savoy would annex Lombardy and much of northern Italy, at the cost of Nice and their homeland Savoy in exchange for French support against the Austrians. It followed up on this victory with the Expedition of the Thousand, reducing the Papal States to Lazio and conquering the entirety of the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. Although still missing Lazio and Triveneto, the Kingdom of Italy was proclaimed following these victories in 1861, with Victor Emmanuel II as the first king of Italy. The dynasty would continue with Umberto I and Victor Emmanuel III, presiding over Italy's transformation into a modern nation. He would oversee 2 world wars and the rise of fascism. His decision to support Benito Mussolini as prime minister and his failure to stop the regime's excesses would permanently damage the monarchy's reputation. After World War II, with Italy defeated and occupied, a referendum abolished the monarchy and exiled the Savoy family, ending nearly a century of their rule. Medici. The Medicis were an Italian bourgeois family that ruled Florence from 1434 and later most of Tuscany. Known for their patronage of the arts, they would sponsor the creation of Botticelli's Birth of Venus and Primavera, Donatello's Bronze David, and Michelangelo's Last Judgment. Popes Leo X and Clement VII were from the Medici family, with Leo X's granting of indulgences being challenged by Martin Luther's 95 Theses. Indulgences at the time were like presidential pardons. You could buy them. Through the centuries, they used their wealth to buy influence in papal elections, raise armies, gain political support, and of course, fund the arts to gain legitimacy through public favor. The dynasty continued into the 18th century, but by that time, Gian Gastone de' Medici died in 1737 without an heir, leading the family's political line to be ended, and Tuscany ultimately passing to the House of Lorraine. Yet the legacy of the Medici still endured, not just in palaces and chapels, but being part of the very foundations of the Renaissance. Braganza. The House of Braganza began as a noble Portuguese lineage in the 15th century, rising through strategic marriages and loyal service to the crown. Their fortunes changed in the early 17th century during the Iberian Union, where in 1640, after 6 decades of being under the Spanish crown, Portugal revolted. The Braganzas led the Restoration movement, and João II, Duke of Braganza, was declared King João IV of Portugal. They reaffirmed Portuguese independence in the Restoration War, re-established overseas trade routes, and maintained control over key colonies like Angola, Mozambique, and Brazil. But their most consequential decision came in 1807 when Napoleon invaded Portugal. Rather than surrender, the Braganza court fled to Brazil, relocating the Portuguese monarchy to Rio de Janeiro. In 1822, following rising nationalist sentiment, João VI returned to Lisbon. His son Pedro I declared Brazilian independence, establishing the Empire of Brazil. The Braganza's rule in Portugal ended with the 1910 Revolution, which abolished the monarchy and established the first Portuguese republic. In Brazil, the monarchy lasted until 1889, when a military coup ousted Emperor Pedro II, ending the empire and establishing the Brazilian Republic. Romanov. Russia's rise to great power status began under the Romanov Peter the Great, who modernized the Russian state and military, imposed Western-style reforms, and expanded Russia's territories. His greatest victory came in the Great Northern War, in which Russia, fighting against Sweden, emerged as a dominant power in the Baltics. The Treaty of Nystad gave Russia ocean access and led to the founding of St. Petersburg, a new capital symbolizing Russia's imperial ambitions. The 18th century saw further expansion under Catherine the Great, who gained territory from the Ottoman Empire, oversaw the partitions of Poland and advanced Enlightenment ideals, extending the empire to the Black Sea, the Caucasus, the Baltic states, Ukraine, and Belarus. In the 19th century, Alexander I led Russia through the Napoleonic Wars. After suffering initial defeats, Russia became the turning point in Napoleon's downfall, most notably during the disastrous 1812 invasion of Russia, which ended in French retreat from Moscow, but imperial overstretch and internal inequality ultimately caught up with the dynasty. In 1853, under Nicholas I, Russia entered the Crimean War against Britain, France, and the Ottomans, with defeat in the war exposing Russia's military and technological backwardness. Russia would suffer yet another defeat in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. During World War I, Russia would collapse under the strain of the wartime economy. This led Nicholas II to abdicate in 1917 during the February Revolution, the October Revolution bringing the Bolsheviks to power. And in 1918, the Tsar and his family were executed by firing squad in Ekaterinaburg, ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule. So that's all the major European houses explained. Thanks so much for watching, and subscribe for more.